The world is certainly a strange place. Around 5 years back, I took on some work as a private investigator. Don't get too excited. It's not nearly as glamorous as it sounds. Most of the time, it was just sitting around, watching, and taking notes. A lot of routine surveillance. TV and movies definitely blow it out of proportion. Over the course of my PI work, I didn't come across anything groundbreaking, but there was one case that stuck with me. A case that really highlighted just how twisted some individuals can be. To protect the privacy of the woman involved, I'll refer to her as Sue. About 6 months into my freelancing PI career, I crossed paths with Sue. She was young, self-assured, and running her own business. Her company was doing remarkably well and continuing to expand. I genuinely admired a lot about Sue. She had started from next to nothing and built that entire enterprise from the ground up. She went out on her own, bringing in several investors to help get things off the ground. One of those investors was a friend of hers named Steve. Initially, she turned down any money from Steve because of their friendship. They'd even gone on a few dates early in their relationship, but realized they worked much better as friends. She'd known Steve for quite a few years, having met him at her previous job. Sue used to tend bar, and Steve was one of her regulars. She didn't know his exact age, but figured he was probably around 10 years older than her. From her account, and from others who knew him, Steve gave off the unmistakable air of a very wealthy man. He drove a Corvette, always appeared ready for a business meeting, and was quick to pull out his wallet to buy rounds. Whenever he came into the bar, Sue would share her dreams and her plans for the business she wanted to launch. Steve would offer her money daily, but she always turned him down. He'd keep insisting, but Sue never gave in. At least, not for a while. Eventually, she hit a wall and ran out of funds from her other investors. She never wanted to accept money from a friend, but it seemed like Steve was her last shot at making her dream a reality. Well, she was about to learn why you never mix business with friends like that, especially friends you share any romantic history with, no matter how brief. Not long after he gave Sue the money, Steve turned verbally abusive. She'd saved every call and text from that period and showed me. This guy called her relentlessly. We're talking around the clock, nonstop. She was too afraid to change her number or involve the authorities because she felt guilty about taking the money. Things got even worse for Sue. Whenever she went out on a date, Steve would show up and intimidate whoever she was with. One night, she went for drinks with a guy she'd been seeing. Steve followed them to the bar. When he saw the man put his arm around Sue, he walked over, punched him in the face, and knocked him out cold. I'm not sure how, but no charges were ever filed against Steve. She thinks it's because of his wealth, but I can't say for sure. According to Sue, the harassment dragged on for months. She felt torn. She'd already spent most of the money Steve had given her. She'd poured everything into her business, but this guy was suffocating her. She claimed it got so bad that she was certain he was lurking around her apartment at night. She'd wake up in the middle of the night to what sounded like footsteps outside her bedroom window. That paranoia made dating or moving forward impossible for her. Whether it was real or not, that constant sense of someone waiting around every corner was devastating. Everywhere she went, she'd spot what she assumed was his red pickup truck. Then, one day, Steve vanished without a trace. The red truck stopped appearing. He stopped showing up at her work. No more footsteps outside the door. It felt like her life was finally returning to normal. Sue hoped he'd simply moved on. Eventually, she started dating again, and no more surprise run-ins with Steve. For a couple of years, she half expected him to reappear, but as time passed, nothing. Her company finally took off, and she moved to a new house to begin the next chapter. That's when she started thinking about Steve a lot. Not fondly. She just wanted to repay all the money he'd put into her business, so he'd never have anything over her. She tried to reach him, but the number she had was disconnected. She searched for him on Facebook and Instagram, but he wasn't on any social platforms. She even went back to the bar where she used to work, but no one had seen him in years. It was like he'd vanished completely. She was ready to let it all go and move forward. And then something happened. In the middle of the night, she heard a knock at her door. She peeked through the window near the front door and spotted a tall figure in a hood. Her gut told her it had to be Steve, though she had no real proof. He knocked again. She didn't answer. She told me he lingered for about 20 minutes before finally walking off. The next day, she reached out to me, and that's when I heard the whole story. She didn't want to play games. She wanted me to locate Steve so she could pay him back and close that chapter for good. After a bit of digging, I discovered that Steve wasn't his real name. I couldn't trace where his money came from. I also found out he'd pulled similar stunts in other towns under different names. He'd flash his cash and try to win over women, but the last known record of him anywhere was around the time he last contacted Sue, over 2 years earlier. All his known aliases had gone silent, and the places he'd rented were no longer occupied by him. One night, during my investigation, the figure returned to her door in the dead of night. She called me immediately. By the time I arrived, he was gone. I spent some time scoping out the area near her house, careful not to wander too far in case he came back. She was petrified that it was him and that he'd keep coming for her. I spent the next few nights staking out the front of Sue's home. I told her that if he returned, I'd catch him. Sure enough, at 2 o'clock in the morning, the person knocked on Sue's door again. I got out of the car to approach, but he spotted me. He bolted into the night. He was quick, but I managed to follow him. He ran into a heavily wooded area near Sue's house. I went back to Sue's to make sure she was okay and told her to stay with a family member just in case. At sunrise, I went into the woods to track him. After a few minutes of walking, I stumbled across something horrifying, almost unbelievable. There was a small shed in the woods. That's the only way to describe it. I slowly opened the door and was immediately hit by a terrible stench. Clearly, someone had been living here and hadn't bathed in ages. Thankfully, no one was inside at the moment. Food wrappers, beer cans, and soda littered the floor, but the worst part of this little shelter wasn't the smell. It was what I found inside, a wheelchair with a mannequin seated in it. The head was slightly battered, covered in makeup and a blonde wig. Resting in the mannequin's lap was a photo of Steve and Sue from her bartending days. It was clearly meant to resemble Sue in a sick, distorted way. I immediately called the police, gave them my location, and filled them in on everything. I met the officers outside the woods a few minutes later. They quietly surveyed the area. Not long after they arrived, the hooded figure returned to his shed and started talking to the mannequin. The police knocked on the shed door, and the man flew into a rage instantly. He tried to attack one of the officers, but was quickly subdued. They arrested him. It was indeed Steve. They had no idea how long he'd been living in the woods and stalking Sue. It's tragic that people out there are capable of such things. If Sue had never contacted me, who knows if Steve would have eventually gotten inside. It didn't seem like he tried to break in, but that doesn't change the fact that whatever he wanted, it wouldn't have been good. What's frustrating is that we never got real answers about Steve. We never found out where he'd gone or how he'd lost all his money. The man arrested in the woods was a hollow version of a human being. I'm sure Sue is still trying to recover from this nightmare. I don't know if you ever fully heal from something that twisted. Music, it just proves that even someone you consider a friend can turn out to be a monster. One of my many flaws is that I'm incredibly vulnerable to peer pressure. It doesn't take much to talk me into anything. When I was younger, I was constantly in trouble for doing dumb things. For example, I got kicked out of my first high school for trying to steal my principal's car, just because someone dared me to. That weakness followed me into adulthood. A few years ago, I had this nagging suspicion that my fiancée was cheating on me. I opened up to some friends, and instead of giving me sound advice, they told me that if I felt that way, there must be something to it. I let all those toxic thoughts burrow into my head. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function without those thoughts consuming me. One friend suggested I hire a private investigator to track her rather than, just talking to her like an adult. At first, I thought the idea was absurd. Honestly, I didn't even know private investigators were a real thing. I figured they were just a movie trope for suspense. Well, I did exactly what you should never do. I looked up private investigators on Craigslist. I wasn't sure if it was even legal, so Craigslist seemed like the only way I'd find someone willing to track my fiancée. I felt anxious about the whole thing. I figured it was just because I was hiring a PI off Craigslist. After a quick search, I reached out to the only person I could find nearby. His name was Shane. We exchanged a few messages and set up a meeting spot. Shane suggested a park close to my house. As I drove there, I felt awful about the whole situation. I felt shady, but the thought of her cheating had completely taken over my mind. I wandered around the park for a while. I texted Shane a few times, but he didn't reply right away. 30 minutes later, he finally messaged me with exact directions. I walked over to a big tree, expecting to see someone straight out of a James Bond movie. Instead, I saw this tall, slightly overweight guy in beat-up sweatpants. I thought, no way, that's Shane. Then he waved me over. He introduced himself, and then introduced me to his girlfriend, Gabby. He could tell I was uneasy. He told me not to worry about Gabby. She works with him, so she could be trusted. She was even more casually dressed than he was. Clearly, their appearance wasn't helping my nerves. I know there's no formal dress code for PIs, but I expected something a bit more professional. Before I could say anything, Shane acknowledged his unprofessional look. He explained that dressing this way is part of the job. They need to blend in like everyday people. I accepted that and moved on. It made sense at the time. We all sat down at a nearby picnic table. Shane started asking for personal details, my address, workplace, and such. And the questions got weirdly intimate. Very personal questions that didn't seem relevant to what we were discussing. Still, I answered everything because I figured that's what I was supposed to do. After a few minutes, we settled on a price. I'd pay part up front and the rest when he delivered the info. He wanted cash only, off the books. I remember hesitating as I handed over the money. I couldn't shake the feeling I was being scammed. I gave him the cash, and he told me he'd be in touch. About a week passed with no word. I tried reaching out a few times, but got no reply. I was starting to think I'd been scammed after all. Then, one night, I got a text at 1:16 a.m. from an unknown number. It was apparently Shane. He said he'd had to get a new phone and apologize for the silence. He told me he had vital information and needed to meet immediately. It couldn't wait. I felt like he was lying since my fiancée was asleep right next to me. Plus, she'd been home with me all day. I kept asking if we could meet in the morning, but he said morning would be too late. That made no sense, but my brain wasn't exactly thinking logically. Shane gave me an address and told me to hurry, reminding me not to forget the rest of the payment. At the time, I was on call 24/7 for my job, so leaving in the middle of the night wasn't unusual. I quietly got ready and left. The address was a 10-minute drive from my house. The entire ride, I was a wreck. I couldn't imagine what terrible news he had. I feared the worst. I pulled up to the house. It was dark and looked abandoned. I wasn't sure I was in the right place. I tried texting and calling the number Shane had used, but no answer. I waited a few minutes. Finally, I got a text. Doors open. I asked if they could meet me outside since I wasn't sure about the location. He replied, doors unlocked. Just open it and come in. I knew this was wrong, but I went to the door anyway. It was unlocked, as he said. I stepped inside slowly. It was nearly pitch black. I said hello a few times. No response. I was about to leave when another text came through. I hear you upstairs. Sorry, forgot to tell you. We're in the basement. That's where our office is. Just go to the door on the far left and come on down. I walked slowly toward the door. Every alarm in my head was blaring. I opened the basement door and looked down. Nothing but darkness. No office, just a black void. All the lights were off. I realized every red flag should have stopped me, but I'm an idiot. I didn't want to believe it was a setup. As I stood at the top of the stairs, another message came. Are you coming down or just standing there all night? That finally broke me. I quietly slipped out of the house, got in my car, and drove off. At first, I thought maybe I was overreacting and should have given them the benefit of the doubt. Then I got one last message. Good for you, buddy. Take care now. I ignored it that night. I had no idea what it meant. I tried calling the next day, but the number was dead. It was obvious that Shane and Gabby had scammed me and were clearly trying to lure me into that basement. When I looked for the ad again, it was gone. For the next few months, I was a nervous wreck. Shane had my address. He knew where I lived. Every noise I heard, I thought it was him trying to break in. I eventually told my fiancée everything because she saw me falling apart. She was upset. I'd suspected her, but she assured me she wasn't cheating. We worked on my trust issues and moved to a new place a few months later. Once I was at a new address, I finally felt safe again. In hindsight, I should have gone to the police, but I didn't. I just cut my losses and moved on. It makes me sick to think how close I came to something horrible. I'm glad my instincts kicked in at the last second. Better late than never. I just hope Shane and Gabby aren't still out there somewhere. At the very least, this story serves as a reminder not to trust everyone and not to be swayed by others' opinions. Sadly, I'm still working on that. As I'm sure many recall, 2020 wasn't exactly a great year. It was even tougher for me because in February, I took a job 8 hours from my hometown. I'd barely been in the new city for a month when everything shut down. It was hard being completely alone. After a few months of staying in, I decided I needed to get out there, even with all the restrictions. It wasn't long before I ended up on dating apps. Honestly, I wasn't looking for love. I just wanted to casually meet people, maybe make a few connections. Over several months, I went on dates with a few different guys. Nothing serious. All of them were perfectly fine, but not what I was looking for. They wanted more than I could give. I was using the apps as a way to re-enter the world, not to find my soulmate. One of the guys I met was named Wade. He was handsome, smart, funny, pretty much everything you'd want in a partner, but something was off. It was just his whole vibe. Something felt wrong. I'd forced relationships before and wasn't going to do it again. I had to give it a chance, though. We went on several more dates. I tried to make it work, but I just didn't feel that spark. I assumed Wade felt the same way. We started talking less and less until we just fizzled out. I moved on with my life, assuming he did too. Neither of us reached out. After Wade, I took a break from dating for a few weeks. That depressed feeling was gone. I'd also made a few local friends by then. A few weeks later, I started noticing a gray SUV with dark tinted windows outside my house. On the surface, that's not that odd, but it felt strange because it had never been there before, and then suddenly it was there every night. After a week of spotting it, I started checking my neighbors' cars. It didn't look like anyone on my street had gotten a new SUV. Not that I could tell, anyway. That weekend, I went to the grocery store. While shopping, I got that awful feeling someone was following me. The store was crowded, so I couldn't tell for sure. When I walked back to my car in the lot, I noticed a gray SUV with tinted windows parked right next to me. It had to be a coincidence. Still, it freaked me out. If it wasn't, that meant someone was tracking me. I loaded my car quickly. As I drove past the store entrance, I noticed something odd. A tall man with slick back hair and sunglasses staring right at my car. At least, it looked like he was staring at me. I was creeped out. I didn't wait to see if he got into the SUV. I tried to shake that uneasy feeling since I had a coffee date with someone named Paul. This was my first date since Wade. I met Paul in the late afternoon. The date was going great. He was charming, and we seemed to click. For the first time, I felt something special. While we were laughing, I happened to glance out the window and saw the gray SUV. Paul noticed my demeanor change instantly and kept asking if I was okay. As soon as I spotted the SUV, I started scanning the coffee shop for the tall man with slicked hair. At a corner table near the door, there he was playing on his phone. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. This man was clearly stalking me. I didn't want to freak Paul out because I actually liked him. I didn't want to tell him a creepy guy in a tinted window SUV was following me everywhere. Great way to secure a second date, right? I told him I had work to do, and he was understanding. I hated lying, but felt it was necessary. We said goodbye, and I left in a hurry, even taking a different route home, just in case. It didn't matter. A few minutes in, I saw the SUV in my rearview mirror following me. I drove around until I didn't see it anymore, then went home. That night, I texted Paul to explain why I'd acted so weird. He was understanding again. While I was telling him, I looked out the window, and the SUV was back outside my house. I was panicking. Paul convinced me to call the police and report it. The cops arrived and approached the SUV. I watched from my living room window. The tall man got out and started talking to the officers calmly. No defensiveness, no anger. I tried to read their body language. He showed the officers something from his coat pocket. Something about it was strange. The cops came to my door after a few minutes. The officer informed me that the man was a licensed private investigator. He'd been following me. I pressed for more details, but they had none. I was shocked and terrified. Who would hire a PI to follow me? I barely knew anyone in town. It felt like a massive invasion of privacy. After the police left, I went outside to confront the SUV, but it was gone. The next few days were rough. The SUV never came back, but that feeling of being watched never fully went away. Not having closure on who hired the PI really bothered me. I did my best to move on, hoping all this creepy business was behind me. A few weeks later, Paul and I went for a hike at a beautiful state park. But for the first time in weeks, I really felt like someone was following us. Even Paul kept turning around to look into the woods. I joked that it was probably another PI trying to finish the job. We laughed and kept hiking. When we got back to the parking lot, Paul said he was going to the bathroom. I was waiting outside, looking at my phone, when I heard running. I looked up. Sprinting out of the woods was Wade, the guy I dated. He grabbed my arm and shouted that we were leaving right now. I started screaming. Wade kept saying I'd been unfaithful, but he'd forgive me. I just had to go with him. Paul heard me, ran out, and tackled Wade. Wade got up, threatened both of us, but Paul stood his ground. Wade started backing away. We ran to Paul's car, and the second I got in, I called the police. At first, nothing came of it. Just he said, she said, with no proof. Believe it or not, the private investigator Wade hired ended up saving me. While investigating me, he realized I wasn't actually in a relationship with Wade like he'd claimed. The PI started to think Wade might be unstable and warned him to stay away. Obviously, he didn't listen. When the police contacted the investigator, he told them Wade could be a problem. I got a restraining order, but that was as far as I could take it legally. Not long after, Wade basically vanished. I never heard from him again, and he deleted all his social media. I'm still scared he'll find me someday. What terrifies me most is that I barely knew him, yet he went to all that trouble to follow me. If Paul hadn't been there, I don't know what Wade would have done. It may sound dramatic, but I believe Paul saved my life that day. It's been a few years, and I haven't seen him, and I hope I never do.